The seed is in his mouth, not to eat, to test. Marcus Webb presses the pale kernel against the inside of his cheek, holds it there for 30 seconds the way his grandfather taught him to test grain back in 1987. Back when grain wasn't trying to kill you. Back when the sky above the Salinas Valley wasn't the color of old copper and the air didn't carry that metallic tang that sits on the back of your throat like a warning you've already ignored too many times. He spits. The seed looks wrong. The coating is slick, oily where it should be dry. He marks it in his water-damaged notebook, day 312. Batch 7, contaminated. That's 47 seeds this week. 47 attempts. 0 viable harvests. But here's what no one talks about when they discuss surviving a nuclear war. The bombs didn't just kill people. They killed the ground itself, and the soil that fed 340 million Americans for 2 centuries is now a slow, invisible executioner. You can't see it. You can't smell it past the existing decay. But it is in everything that grows, everything you eat, and everything you hope will save you. And by day 400, Marcus would discover something alive in that poisoned earth. Something that would force him to make a choice no farmer, no scientist, no human being should ever have to make. Don't look away. Day 312 after the strikes. The Salinas Valley in Central California, once called the salad bowl of the world, produced more than 80% of America's commercially grown lettuce. 70 miles of extraordinary loamy farmland stretching between coastal mountains watered by the Salinas River, built over millennia into some of the most productive soil on Earth, in the kind of ground that farmers used to call black gold. The kind that felt warm and alive when you ran it through your fingers. Now it is gray, not metaphorically. The topsoil is the color of ash because much of it is ash. Particulate fallout from the Los Angeles strikes carried north on disrupted wind currents, settling over every field, every irrigation canal, every remaining greenhouse. The sky above is bruised amber at noon. At dusk, it bleeds into a sulphurous deep orange that looks almost beautiful until your Geiger counter reminds you what beauty costs now. The Salinas River still flows, but nothing lives along its banks. No egrets, no frogs, no insects hovering above the surface. Just a thick brown silence that vibrates at a frequency you feel in the back of your teeth. Cesium-137, with its 30-year half-life, has leached into the water table at concentrations that the EPA's pre-war safe threshold would have classified as a catastrophic contamination event requiring immediate evacuation. There is no EPA anymore. There is no evacuation. There is only the ground and what it is doing to everything that tries to grow in it. The Salinas Valley held approximately 430,000 residents before the war. Current estimates, assembled from council headcounts, radio check-ins, and the grim mathematics of attrition, suggest fewer than 9,000 remain, clustered primarily in the inland foothills above Soledad, far enough from the coastal blast vectors to survive the initial weeks. Marcus Webb is 44 years old. He spent 19 years as an agricultural extension agent for Monterey County. The person that commercial farmers called when their crops failed, when soil samples came back strange, when a fungal blight moved through a field overnight and someone needed to understand why. He knew soil chemistry the way surgeons know blood, not academically but intimately through years of hands-on diagnosis. He understood what the land was telling you when you knew how to listen. That knowledge didn't save his wife, didn't save his 2 daughters, aged 9 and 12, but it saved him. in the way that being deeply practically useful keeps you moving when grief would otherwise nail your feet to the floor permanently. He crossed paths once with Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, a home and infectious disease physician who had practiced at Natividad Medical Center and now operated out of a converted horse trailer at the edge of the Soledad encampment. She gave him a supply of activated charcoal tablets, a sealed bottle of potassium iodide, and a warning he hasn't been able to stop thinking about since. The contamination in the regional food chain was accelerating. Bioaccumulation, every trophic level concentrating what the level below it absorbed. He didn't ask her how long that gave them. And somewhere east of his position in the abandoned greenhouse complex near Gonzales, something was already waiting that would confirm his worst calculations about what accelerating really means. Each morning begins with a Geiger counter reading before Marcus allows himself a single cup of processed water. He distills everything through a 4-stage system he assembled from salvaged HVAC pipe sections, broken ceramic pot fragments, activated charcoal rendered from burned animal bone, and fine river sand layered between sections of cotton field sheeting. It removes most suspended particulates and significantly reduces soluble radionuclides through adsorption. But tritium, radioactive hydrogen, passes through every filter ever designed. You cannot separate it from water molecules chemically. Some contamination cannot be engineered around. You absorb it and accept what that means for your cells over the coming years. And you keep moving. His daily caloric intake runs approximately 900 calories, barely half the minimum adult baseline. He sustains himself on canned goods scavenged from the processing plants near King City. He cross-referenced against a makeshift dosimeter he built from components salvaged from smoke detectors and an old radiation safety manual he found waterlogged in a county office building. The dosimeter clicks faster when contamination levels rise. That clicking sound, increase means stop, means back away, means don't touch, is the most critical language remaining in this version of the world. Water processing takes 4 hours each morning. The work of it keeps his hands busy, which keeps his mind from going to places it cannot return from easily. The health consequences are written on his body now. His gums bleed when he chews. 3 fingernails have developed the horizontal white ridges that physicians call Mises lines, a clinical marker of heavy metal toxicity or significant radiation exposure. His sleep cycles have fragmented, and he rarely achieves more than 3 consecutive hours before nausea wakes him. He manages it with ginger root grown in a sheltered microclimate behind a south-facing concrete retaining wall. One of the only plants he's found that seems to tolerate the contaminated topsoil with its edible tissue remaining below detectable threshold. And then there are the people who want what little he has. A group of 6 men entered the greenhouse compound last week, armed, frightened, doing what frightened people do when resources disappear. He watched them from inside a ventilation crawl space for 4 hours without moving, breathing slowly through a cloth sleeve soaked in water. They didn't find him, but they found his backup seed cache. 7 months of careful accumulation, seeds selected for contamination resistance and stored in sealed metal tins. Half of it is gone. He did not chase them. He marked the loss in his notebook and kept working. Because stopping means thinking, and thinking means remembering. The rat colonies arrived in force around day 289, moving through the valley's field rows in organized patterns that animal behaviorists, had any survived, would have struggled to classify as normal foraging behavior. Radiation exposure affects the neurological architecture of Rattus norvegicus in documented predictable ways. Reduced fear response, elevated aggression, disrupted circadian rhythm, erratic motor patterns. These were not new findings. Chernobyl researchers had documented them for decades. What no study had anticipated was what the contamination would do to behavior at the colony level. The strange, unsettling coordination, the apparent communication, even the way they moved through contaminated zones without the avoidance instincts their species had spent millennia developing. They were eating the failed seed trays, the contaminated kernels Marcus had abandoned as non-viable, the ones with the slick, oily coating. Not out of desperation. There were softer, more accessible food sources nearby. They seemed drawn to the irradiated material as though the cellular mutations had rewired something deep in their nutritional instincts. And they were wrong in their bodies, not dramatically, not like something from a horror film. Just subtly, wrongly wrong. Thicker-chested, slow to react, with patchy fur along the dorsal spine and eyes that had gone pale and clouded. On day 312, three of them breached Marcus's primary underground growing chamber. The sealed hydroponic space beneath the greenhouse floor he'd spent 6 weeks engineering. They destroyed every active tray in 9 minutes. Root system shredded, growing medium scattered, 6 weeks of the most careful work of his life, gone. He killed them with a length of sharpened irrigation pipe. Standing over the bodies in the dim red grow light, his hands shaking badly, he noticed something growing in the disturbed substrate where they'd been digging. Something that wasn't dead. Something that looked like it had never been anything but alive. Before the war, hydroponic farming was considered a premium agricultural novelty. Expensive, technically demanding, the province of boutique urban operations and research universities. And it was the future of farming in the abstract, theoretical sense that futures often are before necessity makes them urgent. Now it is the only option. Marcus had spent the first 100 days of the aftermath conducting soil contamination surveys across 22 separate sample sites throughout the valley. Every single one exceeded safe thresholds for cesium-137, strontium-90, and iodine-131. The primary radionuclides that bond electrostatically to soil clay particles and enter plant tissue through root uptake. Once in the root system, they cannot be removed. Cooking doesn't destroy radioactivity. Washing doesn't dislodge it from cellular tissue. Any plant grown in contaminated ground becomes a delivery mechanism. A slow, accumulating dose in every bite. So he went underground. 8 feet below the greenhouse floor. Below the frost line. Yet below the horizon of maximum soil contamination. He built a sealed hydroponic chamber using corrugated steel roofing panels. Polyethylene sheeting doubled and heat fused at the seams, and framing timber salvaged from a collapsed packing facility. The nutrient solution he formulated from non-contaminated sources. Sealed commercial potting mix residue he'd found in a storage unit still locked and dry. Remnants of pre-war agricultural fertilizer concentrate from a locked supply shed he finally broke into on day 290, and leachate from wood ash filtered through fragments of zeolite mineral he'd chipped from a geological exposure site in the Gabalin Range. The growing medium is expanded clay pellets, sterile, inert, and physically incapable of absorbing or retaining radionuclides. The first viable sprouts appeared on day 308. Lettuce, in the same crop that made this valley famous before everything. The cost, 2 fingers on his left hand, burned through a chemical accident during the nutrient concentration process when a seal failed and the solution splashed. He dressed the wounds himself with what remained of his medical kit. Dr. Okonkwo's radio frequency has been silent for 11 days. He does not let himself calculate what that likely means. The Salinas Valley Survivor Council convenes every 10 days, weather permitting, violence permitting. 11 people around a folding table in a reinforced storm shelter south of Greenfield. They make decisions about resource allocation, territorial boundary enforcement, conflict mediation, and increasingly about punishment. And 3 men were executed last month for poisoning a communal water reservoir. Whether through deliberate sabotage or catastrophic incompetence, the council judged the distinction irrelevant. Deterrence has replaced jurisprudence. When survival margins are this thin, the math of justice changes in ways that make pre-war people, if any could see it, deeply uncomfortable. Marcus attends when summoned. His agricultural knowledge has become a form of currency more valuable than anything printed or minted. The council feeds him better than he feeds himself because he represents their best chance at sustainable food production. He has refused twice to join their enforcement structure. He is not interested in governing people. He is interested in growing food in poisoned ground, which is already more than any one person should have to carry. And beyond California's borders, the picture assembled from fragmentary shortwave transmissions is bleak in its scope. Canada is managing a catastrophic displacement crisis. Estimates suggest more than 8 million Americans have crossed the northern border or perished attempting it. Mexico's northern states operate under military quarantine against cross-border migration. Across the Pacific, Japan and South Korea, nations that committed no act of war, are experiencing radioactive fallout across their coastal agricultural belts via altered jet stream patterns, triggering cascading food shortages in populations that had no warning and no role in what happened. The world did not end on the day of the strikes. It simply contracted into something harder, smaller, and permanently less than it was. He found his daughter's hair tie on day 301, a pink plastic, small white flower. The kind Emma wore for soccer practice, the kind she lost constantly and he was always finding wedged between couch cushions or in the pocket of his truck's passenger door, rolling her eyes at him when he held it up like a discovery. It had been in the front pocket of a jacket he'd been wearing the morning the strikes happened, and had somehow never removed since. He sat in the dark of the underground growing chamber for 4 hours and did not move, did not eat, did not check his instruments. What brought him back was the grow lights clicking on. The automated relay timer he'd rigged from a salvaged car battery and a mechanical switch. Indifferent. Mechanical. Clicking on at the program time regardless of what was happening to the person below them because photosynthesis doesn't pause for grief. He got up because the plants needed the light. He tells himself that's the only reason. He doesn't examine it too carefully. By day 400, Marcus Webb's underground hydroponics system will produce approximately 1.4 kilograms of leafy greens per week. Enough for one person to maintain basic nutritional function. Enough for 2 people if rationed with discipline. Not enough for 11 people. Not enough for a council. Not enough for a valley. But it is a proof of concept. And proof of concept in a world where most concepts have been disproved violently is not a small thing. The strange growth that the rats uncovered in his substrate, the thing he noticed growing where nothing should have been able to grow, turned out, after weeks of careful observation and cross-referencing with a water-damaged mycology textbook he found in the ruins of the county library, to be a radiotrophic fungus. species first formally documented in samples collected from the walls inside the Chernobyl reactor building in 1991. Organisms that do not merely tolerate ionizing radiation. They appear to metabolize it, using melanin pigments to convert gamma radiation into chemical energy the way plants use chlorophyll to convert sunlight. They don't just survive in radiation, they eat it. Marcus has collected 23 samples, carefully isolated, stored in sealed containers, labeled in his careful field agent handwriting. He doesn't know yet whether they are edible or toxic to humans. He doesn't know whether they can be cultivated at scale, whether they can be used to accelerate soil decontamination, whether what he's looking at is the beginning of a genuine agricultural revolution in a post-nuclear world. He doesn't know whether anyone else has found them, whether anyone else is asking the same questions. But here is the question that keeps him awake on the nights when his body allows him sleep at all. If the Earth itself is beginning to adapt, if life is evolving mechanisms to metabolize the very radiation we use to destroy it, are we witnessing the first signs of recovery? Or are we watching something emerge that learned to thrive in the world we made and has no particular need for us in it?